I am 67 years old, and I was born inside a prison camp in North Korea. My name is Kang Min Jae. I was not arrested. I did not commit a crime. I was born there because my grandfather tried to leave the country in 1952. In North Korea, punishment does not end with one generation. It spreads like a shadow. The camp was the only world I knew. There were mountains in the distance, but we were told they were dangerous. Beyond the fence, they said, there was nothing but enemies and starvation. As a child, I believed them. We woke up before sunrise. Even at 6 years old, I worked carrying rocks, sorting coal, pulling weeds from frozen soil. If you were slow, you were beaten. If you complained, your food was reduced. Hunger was constant. It wasn't pain anymore. It was just part of breathing. I remember my mother's hands. They were always cracked and bleeding. She never cried in front of me. Not once. But sometimes at night, when she thought I was asleep, I could hear her whispering apologies. In the camp, you learned quickly not to ask questions. People disappeared. Sometimes entire families. No explanation. One day they were there. The next day their sleeping space was empty. When I was 10, I saw my first public execution. We were all forced to watch. The guards said it was necessary. They said fear keeps order. That was the day I understood something. We were not prisoners because of something we did. We were prisoners because we were born. But when you are a child, even suffering feels normal. I didn't dream of escape. I didn't know escape was possible. Everything changed when I was 17. By then, I was working in the mining section of the camp. It was considered a promotion. It just meant you survived long enough to be useful. My mother had grown weaker that winter. Food rations were cut again after someone tried to steal corn from the storage building. Collective punishment. That was the rule. One night, my mother whispered something she had never said before. She said, "There is a river beyond the northern fence." I thought she was delirious. She told me my grandfather had once described China, a place where people could leave their homes without permission, where you could eat until you were full. I didn't believe her. But then she said something else. "If you ever see a chance, you must go, even if I cannot." 2 weeks later, she collapsed during work. They didn't take her to a hospital. There was no hospital. They took her away in a truck. I never saw her again. That was the first night I stayed awake, not from hunger, but from anger. For the first time in my life, I felt something dangerous, not fear, not obedience, but hatred. And hatred is dangerous in a place built on control. I began to notice things I had ignored before. The guard rotations, the blind spots near the northern fence, the older prisoners who had stopped believing the lies. One man, Mr. Han, had been in the camp since he was a boy. He told me quietly that the river freezes in late winter. "If you run," he said, "you must run when the ice is thick." I asked him why he never tried. He looked at me and said, "Because someone has to survive long enough to tell you how." That was the moment the idea became real. I did not tell anyone. Not Mr. Han, not my friends, not the boy who slept beside me for 12 years. Hope was dangerous. If you gave it to someone, you could destroy them. I waited until February. The cold that year was violent. Even the guards complained. Even the dogs stayed inside their cages longer than usual. That's how I knew it was time. I stole nothing. No food, no extra clothes. If they searched me before work, I wanted to look empty. That night, during a shift change, I pretended to trip while carrying tools near the outer work zone. There was a section of fencing that had rusted near the bottom where the snow had piled high. I had noticed it weeks earlier. I didn't run immediately. I waited. You learn patience in a prison camp. You learn how to breathe slowly so your fear doesn't betray you. When the lights shifted and the guards turned toward the main gate, I pushed my body into the snow and crawled. The wire tore my jacket. It cut my back. I didn't stop. For a moment, I thought the alarm would sound. It didn't. I didn't stand up until I reached the trees. And then I ran. I ran without direction, without a plan beyond one thing north. The forest was deeper than I imagined. My lungs burned. My feet went numb. By dawn, I reached the river. It was wider than I expected. The ice looked thin in places. The wind moved across it like something alive. I remember standing there thinking I survived the camp. This is where I die. But going back was not an option. So I stepped onto the ice. Every step sounded like thunder in my head. Halfway across, I heard something crack. I didn't look down. I ran. When I reached the other side, I collapsed into the snow. There were no guards, no shouting, no fences, just silence. For the first time in my life, there was no one telling me where I belonged. People asked me if I was afraid when I crossed the river. I wasn't. Fear was something I learned to live with long before that night. What I was selfish. There was someone I didn't tell. His name was Ji-hoon. He was 1 year younger than me. We worked in the mines together. We shared food when one of us was starving more than the other. The night before I ran, he told me something. He said he had dreamed about leaving. He said sometimes he imagined what bread tasted like when it was fresh. I remember laughing. I told him dreams were dangerous. I had already decided I was leaving the next night. I didn't tell him, because if he asked to come with me, I might have said yes. And if he slowed me down, we both would have died. 2 days after I crossed the river, I heard shouting in the distance from the North Korean side. Gunshots, dogs. I still don't know if they were looking for me, or if someone else tried to run. For years, after I made it to South Korea, I told people I survived because I was strong. That isn't true. I survived because I was willing to leave someone behind. I am 67 years old now. I have children, grandchildren. They ask me why I stare at the mountains sometimes. It's because somewhere beyond them, there is a fence. And maybe a man named Ji-hoon who never got the chance to run. Freedom is a strange thing. You can cross a river and still carry a prison inside you. That is my confession.